So I was in court on Thursday to hear the testimony of Danny, who was one of the three sisters in the family of three sisters and one brother and a mother and father who moved from Mexico to Albany, New York to take part in NXIVM. Her sister Mariana had a baby with Keith Raniere, and her younger sister Camilla was known also as the Virgin Camilla, who was the top DOS slave and was also the subject of the child pornographic pictures that are in the indictment. So I had been gone from trial for a little while, and there have been some changes since I had last been in trial. For one, the pastel sweaters that Keith Raniere had once worn are gone, replaced with these somber black sweaters, and the jury's mood is shifted, visibly shifted. So before they kind of were interested and attentive and very much a poker face, and now every time Keith Raniere's lawyer, Mark Agnafilo, steps up, their heads turn like a tennis match, and it's as if a bad smell has entered the room. Their brows furrow, their noses crinkle, and it's clear that they find Keith Raniere and the defense hard to take and distasteful. So Daniela was brought in to testify, and she came in. She's a very slim, striking, beautiful woman, and she was wearing a leather skirt, white shirt with her hair long and to the side off of her shoulder, and she struts into the courtroom to testify, and she struts like a supermodel. And she never looked at Keith Raniere once. It's this really high-heeled, strong walk. And I was surprised because I had heard her testimony was incredibly emotional, and I was waiting to see this kind of fragile, beaten-down person. And that is not what I saw at all. I saw a really strong woman filled with confidence. And she talked about the time that she spent, the 2 years she spent in a room in Albany, because she had committed the ethical breach of falling for another man named Ben Myers and kissing him. And Keith Raniere told her that was a ethical breach, that he needs total devotion, and that she only cares about herself, and she's selfish, and she needs to heal it by spending 2 years alone I don't think he said 2 years, but a time alone in a room. So she was in a room alone with the windows papered over, a mattress on the floor, and given paper and pen to write with. And every day she wrote letters to Keith Raniere, begging him to let her out of the room. Some of the letters we saw there, and the first thing that was so striking about the letters was the handwriting. This is unlined paper, and it was perfectly straight, and it looked like a font, so like a script font. And she had different types of letters where she made plans. I'm going to run a triathlon. I'm going to do this. And every day she had her weight, what her weight was, of course, that's a never-ending obsession for Keith Raniere to keep his women devotees extremely thin and malnourished. And she was rejected in her plans to run a triathlon, because, of course, that might give her some self-confidence and make her physically stronger. I think Keith Raniere liked his women weak, emaciated, and dependent, but that's my own observation. And she described her life in the room where she could hear her family talk, and she described the emotions of hearing her family have a life outside the four walls she was confined in. And she said, I loved hearing them because there was a connection to people I loved, but I also hated them because they were experiencing life, and life was going on without me. She also described the physical illnesses that she went through that were untreated. She described having rashes and begging for Benadryl, and she was never given Benadryl. She was given something else that, of course, didn't work. She described a terrible toothache that went on and on and on until part of her tooth broke. And then she was finally escorted to the dentist, and she describes the dentist appointment and the experience of seeing the outside world and feeling the breeze and just having all that stimulus as scary and exciting. And it was like going to the dentist was the peak experience, as you can imagine, if you're confined in that room. And that was also really sad. She also created these newsletters called the Walton Times, and that they were like a newspaper, like the New York Times, giving Keith Raniere the news of life in the room. And she drew wonderful cartoons with different panels. And one of them was on her sister's birthday, so she drew herself sending her sister a kiss in a paper airplane, and it was so touching. And you realize how extraordinary these NXIVM devotees are, and what incredible people they were. And so much more extraordinary than Keith Raniere himself, who they're supposed to be learning from, the great master, right? And of course, she was discouraged from, I think she made maybe 4 or 5 of these Walton Times newsletters, and then they told her it was an ethical breach to continue to create them. But they're really, I was really impressed by them, and I thought they were really creative and interesting. We also saw pictures where they looked like they were created maybe by different people. Self-portraits, notes to herself in different kinds of scrawling handwriting, where she had lost all hope. And you realize how fractured your mind becomes when you are confined to a room with no human contact or very little human contact. Lauren Salzman was the only one allowed to have contact with her, and she came infrequently. So I'm sure the question you're asking yourself is, why didn't she just leave? Well, her family was there, and they told her that if she left to go back to Mexico, they would take her papers. And in Mexico, you cannot work without papers. It's very difficult. And she would be leaving everything she knew, and she would also be leaving with no money, so she was terrified. But after 2 years, that is what she did. She left with a backpack full of clothing, $60 that she stole from her father, some more money that her father gave her, and she chose the safest city in Mexico by looking it up on the internet and decided to go there. And she described going to a hostel, living in a room with 8 people, and being obsessed with surviving as you would. And she worked every day to find a job and got turned down more times than you could count because she didn't have papers. But she got a job for $200 a month working at a computer store. And eventually she had 4 different jobs. And one of those jobs was teaching tennis to a woman who worked for, I think, a human rights organization. And she confided in that mother of the child that she taught tennis lessons to that she didn't have papers. And the mother said to her, well, having papers is a human right. And she got her papers. And she now runs a import-export factory in Mexico where she supervises 250 people. She also described once she had cemented herself and become a success in Mexico, trying to get her sister Camilla out from being involved in NXIVM. She was a nanny in the Rainbow Gardens Coalition, and she was being paid $10,000 a year, and obviously still very much under the control of NXIVM and Keith Raniere. And Daniela talked about the caution and the absolute care she took not to make any judgments and to continually tell Camilla that it was her choice, that she didn't have to do anything, but she sent her a bank card with money, and so that she would have food, and she eventually got her to Mexico. But she described Camilla's state as so poor that she would have freakouts and say, you're just trying to control me. And she said, look, here, have some money. You can go back to America now. Go anywhere you want, So just the patience and care she took to try to get her sister into a good place was also very moving. Just watching this as a person who had to rebuild myself, who had also lost everything in life and had to rebuild myself, it was a very emotional. There's times I wept in court watching this. I know I wasn't alone. The jury was clearly very much sympathetic to her, so I was very curious to see Mark Agnifilo cross-examine her. Now, I thought, because there was a short questioning of a Google representative before Danny came up. Now, I think the point was of that questioning to show that NXIVM opened up many encrypted accounts under Camilla's name. I believe that was what, it wasn't fully explained. And when Mark Agnifilo cross-examined this young man from Google, who came all the way from San Francisco to testify for less than a half an hour, he was very nice. And, if I ask you anything you don't understand, just stop me. I'm kind of like, I'm an old guy. I don't understand all this tech business. What's a messenger account type stuff, like very, very easygoing, very affable, because that's really all Mark Agnifilo has left. All he has left are to kind of manage the look of his client and trying to win the affections of the jury with his personality. The facts are so damning, that's really what he has to work with. And I talked to Stanley, who's been coming to court for as long as I have, and he is a drama coach, and he made a very interesting observation, which is that Keith Raniere never stops taking notes during the trial. He has a pencil, and he just sends Post-its nonstop to Mark Agnifilo, who seems unimpressed with the great man's Mr. 220 IQ's thoughts on this on the trial. And Stanley made the observation that it's all in Mark Agnifilo's walk, that when he walks up to cross-examine or the witnesses, he has a walk like he's walking to the gallows. It's a very defeated, reluctant walk, and he actually demonstrated that for me downstairs in the court lobby, and he was so right. And thank you for that. So you get a lot some of what you get from talking to other people about this court case is you get some confidence in your own opinion, right? So we're all seeing the same thing. And sometimes you get some more insight that things you wouldn't have noticed or didn't think of. Mr. 100%, Mark Agnafilo, is a real mystery to me. I don't know what makes him tick besides winning court cases and money. But so I was just very interested. And I don't think you have to wonder how you would feel about having a client who insisted on going to trial, right? Keith Raniere did himself no favors by going to trial. And when Daniela was about to be cross-examined, I looked at Keith Raniere's face, and he was so excited. It looked like he was ready to see Danny be brought down. And that was also another image I got in my head from listening to Danny's testimony, and it was of my brother who used to like to torture ants. And the sadism of Keith Raniere is so evident in Danny's testimony. At one point, they played a tape of Danny's mother begging Keith Raniere to let Danny out of the room. And Keith Raniere talks about how selfish her daughter is, meaning Danny, and that she only cares about herself. She only wants to do what feels good. That she is completely adverse to correcting this breach. And he brings up the Robert De Niro movie, The Mission, and he talks about when the character of Rodrigo finally sees the way to correct things. He doesn't worry about running triathlons. He only wants to make things right. And then Keith Raniere keeps making the analogy: if you killed a child, how, and you had no concern to what you have done, would that be right? No, that would be bad. And Keith Raniere's mastery of the English language is poor. His grammatical errors, maybe I'm just the daughter of a writer, but the grammatical errors he made talking to Daniela's mother were many. I was just surprised by that. You would think that would be part of his slick presentation. And his voice, he has this kind of soft man, Mr. Sensitive voice. And I was also reminded of The Godfather, where he sometimes doesn't even say words. He just says, mm-hmm. And he's not really listening to Daniela's mother. He's waiting to talk, but he's doing a good imitation of someone who's thoughtful. So when this tape was played with Keith Raniere asking the mother, if you killed a child, if you ran over a child, Moira Penza, the prosecutor, stopped the tape and asked Daniela, did you kill a child? And she answers, no, I kissed Ben Myers. It was a powerful moment. So the cross-examination of Daniela had Mark Agnafilo brought none of the Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. Affable attitude. He was curt. He was nasty. He was short. And he was aggressive. And I don't think it was very effective, but that's just me. He really honed in on the money that Daniela stole. So, allegedly. So, she admitted to stealing $6,000. She admitted to stealing the money from her father's wallet before she went to Mexico. Then he pointed out in the letters that she wrote to Keith Raniere that she would repay TJ Maxx, Walmart, and a couple other stores. And Daniela testified that she didn't remember what that was about. Now, I think that was a misstep to Daniela. My take on it, and it was different than some other court goers, was that Daniela, when she was involved in NXIVM, had some kind of shoplifting issue, stealing issue, as I would think a control issue, maybe an expression of anger. I don't know, but she had some issue with it. And she would have done much better to have said, yes, I did that. At that time in my life, I was in a crazy cult and was acting out, rather than saying I didn't remember. I didn't believe that she didn't remember. Mark Agnefellow got very aggressive. You don't remember it. You wrote it, but you don't remember it. Pounded her over and over. And Keith Raniere was just beaming during this cross-examination. Beaming meaning he was at the edge of his seat, leaning forward. My impression was that this was his great revenge, and he was going to show the jury what a terrible person she really was. You're so attached to this woman, you think she's such a victim. Well, she's really a horrible person. But we had already listened to her, and the jury had already listened to her for days, talking about how everything had been taken from her. Her sense of self, her self-respect, her health, years of her life. No amount of stealing is equivalent to that. Sorry. And it will really give you an idea how out to lunch Keith Raniere really is if he thinks that that's going to have any effect on a jury. But it is a good reminder. I know Stanley thought that Daniela was coached to say, I don't remember. Possibly she was told maybe once or twice to say if something's damning, just say you don't remember. Maybe you didn't do it, but you don't remember. It's just, my opinion is it's much better to be completely honest. I think there's a great strength of vulnerability. What was so apparent that came out in this day in court was that Keith Raniere, who was supposed to be, and is supposed to be, such a smart, wise man, a teacher, knows so little about what's important in life. And his students know so much. And I don't understand how he thinks he's going to win points with saying someone's a thief compared to what he's on trial for. He took everything from his followers, everything. Their health, their self-esteem, their self-image, years of their life. He destroyed family relationships, marriages. I think he has no sense of it. I just think he's deluded and has no sense of himself, and that was clearly evident in court. But there are still so many questions that haven't been answered in this court case yet. How did NXIVM go on for so long? Who in the government gave them a pass and why? Especially in the local government. And Allison Mack, I got to sit next to a woman I'll call Lisa because she doesn't want to be identified, who was friends with Allison Mack, who came to watch the court. And I was really eager to get her take on Allison Mack, and I asked her whether she was a victim or a victimizer, and she said both. But I said, is she a sociopath? And she said, I don't know. That's another mystery. Allison Mack, who she was, what was she a victim? Was she both? It's still a mystery. And there's still so many things that haven't been answered in this court case, and we don't know what the defense is going to put on, if they're going to put on a defense. So right now it looks very bad for Keith Raniere, but of course we've only seen the prosecution's witnesses. We haven't seen any defense witnesses. But if this cross-examination is any indication, it looks very, very bad for Keith Raniere. And many court goers are saying he's going to go away for life. It's it. It's cooked. I'm not going to say that yet because I think anything can happen, right? And you never know which way a jury's going to go, and you never know the way sentencing is going. Certainly I learned that lesson after Claire Bronfman bought herself a $6 million ticket out of a long prison sentence. Put your predictions for the way this court case is going to go in the comment section, and I'll see you back next time.